Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year's. Thank you for tuning in to the first episode of Coffee and Something Stronger in 2021. Today is also Election Day in Georgia, so if you have not made a plan to vote, please do that and check out where your voting location is and get that done. Polls are open until 7 o'clock tonight, so as long as you're in line by 7, you will be allowed to vote. Again, thank you for tuning in to Coffee and Something Stronger. My name is Cody Nord, the Executive Director of Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. Coffee and Something Stronger is a coffee chat style interview show where we sit down with faith leaders, practitioners, and academics to talk about the intersections of climate, faith, and other justice issues of our time. And this morning, we have a very special guest to kick off the guest list of 2021, Brionte McCorkle, a friend of mine, a friend of Gipple, who currently serves as the Executive Director of Georgia Conservation Voters, but previously was the Director of Engagement at Eco Districts, and before that, the Assistant Director of the Georgia chapter of the Sierra Club. Brionte, thank you for joining us this morning.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here on Election Day in
It's a
20.
big day.
Yeah, I'm just really excited to be talking about the things that we're going to dive into today, and to be kicking off the year here with you and on such an important and critical day in our nation's history. So
Definitely. Yeah, thank you for giving up some time. To start, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got into the work that you're doing?
sure, yeah. So I like to start with why I fell in love with the environment, and it has everything to do with this great state of Georgia. I'm a military brat, so when I was younger, I moved around a lot, mostly in Western states, out in the desert. So much of my childhood was, running around the Mojave Desert, looking at cactuses and tumbleweeds and whatnot. And then at 10 years old, we moved to Georgia, cross country trip. I remember waking up in the car, my mom being like, "This is it." And I was looking around and I saw just, trees as far as the eye could see. And, at that point, 10 years old, I had never seen a tree that wasn't supported by sticks and sprinkler systems. So, one, I was just blown away how big they were and how many of them were. And it really planted a seed for my environmentalism, just realizing how dramatically different parts of the world are and how special each part is. Um, and I also learned a lot about race when I got to Georgia as well. I went from military communities, which are fairly diverse, lots of people from all over the world, lots of culture sharing, and then, off military base into a regular community that was still very much segregated economically and by, as consequently by race. And so Georgia woke me up to two passions, which was the environment and also equity and social justice. And so yeah, from there, I went to Georgia State University. I studied public policy. And after that, I just spent all of my time in different environmental nonprofits, in Atlanta, South Face Energy Institute being one of them. Then Sierra Club, where I worked to expand transit throughout the metro Atlanta area. I had a very successful campaign expanding MARTA to Clayton County, which took some significance during the general election, because that's sort of when the votes were pouring in. That's the county that was whose votes were coming in. And so, yeah, Clayton County MARTA expansion is probably one of my most proudest moments in my career. And yeah, I ran for Atlanta City Council after that, missed it by 166 votes, solidifying my passion, which was already there, but is now named civic engagement. Super important that people, plug in and vote at every level of government, not just the federal. Yeah, and then after that, I worked at eco districts, trying to build these beautiful, sustainable cities of the future without gentrifying and displacing people. And after that, I wanted to get back into grassroots organizing and get back to working and focusing on Georgia. So I took the role as executive director at Georgia Conservation Voters, and I absolutely just love what I do every day. Just
Yeah.
wake up and mobilize the next generation of climate activists.
Yeah, we're going to try to dive into all of those things this morning. and I'm excited to talk about it. I think you have a reading or a quote to offer this morning before we dive in.
I do. Yeah. So this is a quote that struck me sort of at the conclusion of last year. It was from Antonio Guterres with the United Nations He's the United Nations Secretary General. So I was reading a newsletter and I saw this quote. Now is the time to transform humankind's relationship with the natural world and with each other, and we must do so together. Solidarity is humanity. Solidarity is survival. That is the lesson of 2020. So that's my reading.
Yeah, what does that kind of evoke for you?
Yeah, I think that we have been in a very divisive posture as a nation. And I think it's really undermining our ability to come together and find common ground and to have honest conversations about the future that we want to see. We have a small window of opportunity to act, to mitigate climate, and I really want us to be focused on solutions and coming together to implement those solutions and making sure those solutions work for as many people as possible. um, so yeah, I mean, the divisiveness of 2020, it really hurt us all spiritually. It hurt us all emotionally, mentally. Everyone was just ready to close that book, you know,
Yeah.
when New Year's hit. So, I'm hoping that 2021 is a time for us to come together and to have a serious discussion about the future that we want to see and to take real action towards building that.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a kind of the spiritual component, and I know that you have kind of a diverse array of faith expression. But I wanted to invite you to talk a little bit about how kind of what that faith journey has been like for you, but more importantly, how has your faith tradition or your experience of faith influenced the work that you do?
Yeah, so I grew up Christian, Baptist, and it's mostly because I was told we didn't go to church often, but there was always like a Bible on the coffee table, and so that was my upbringing. And so as I got older, I went on a journey, as young people do, questioning my faith and what it is that really spoke to me. And yeah, I really got into doing lots of yoga and meditation. So I explored Buddhism and Hinduism a little bit. And then I married a gentleman from West Africa who was Muslim. So I learned a lot about that. So what I found was that I think a lot of the religions are, speaking to the same principles and values about how to live on this planet and how to live together and how to treat each other. They might be using different stories, different historical figures, and different metaphors, and have different practices, but generally the core seems to be pretty similar across the board. So now I'm kind of this, I say I'm agnostic, but I read a Bible verse every day. I read a verse from the Quran every day. I meditate every day. I, observe Lent. I observe Ramadan. So I try to be very spiritual and eclectic in that spirituality. And I think what it does for my work is it keeps me really open to what people are saying, and understanding they might not be using the same language or words that I might be using, or the same stories, um, but to really listen for the core of what they're asking for. That's because one of my main titles as an organizer, right? You're going into communities, you're getting to know people, you're getting to understand their backgrounds and their hopes and dreams and desires, and trying to help them see their power in a system where they, feel like they've lost faith. And so, being open to so many ideas and perspectives means that I'm open to what's coming up in these conversations, what people are saying, and I'm able to receive it without judgment and without as much bias. And I think it results in deeper relationships and, more authentic power building. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, that's really good. Well, today is in fact election day, and I know for the most part, everybody who is watching this show right now probably has been bombarded 1,000 times through text messages and emails, and God knows how many flyers in the mail about voting today, and primarily centered around Senate candidates. But that's not the only race on the ballot. I really wanted to spend some time talking about the Public Service Commission seat. And I know, Brionte, you've spent a lot of time being involved with the PSC for a while on a number of different issues. And I wonder if you could just talk about kind of who the PSC is, what do they do, why people should care about them on the ballot.
Yeah, so the Public Service Commission is super, super important. And for decades, they've gone fairly under the radar. So the Georgia Public Service Commission is an elected body, five elected officials. They are elected statewide. They each, even though they have districts by their names, the districts are sort of irrelevant. They are elected statewide. And so they're accountable to everyone in the state. And what the Georgia Public Service Commission does is regulate utilities in Georgia, in particular, Georgia Power, which is our sort of monopoly utility in the state. It is, and they also regulate Atlanta Gas Light and have a big role to play in things like broadband access across the state, which has taken on new significance since COVID, where there are more demands to meet and to do business online. So the Public Service Commission, the decisions that they're making every day literally influence our lives every day, right? Our everyday lives. These aren't, big faraway concepts. This is the power bill that you get every month. This is, your ability to turn on the laptop to live stream this video on Facebook, right? Like this is they have such a critical role to play in the infrastructure that we depend on in our lives. And we mostly talk about the work that they do around energy. We obviously have, again, a limited window of time to address climate change. And one of the main things that we need to do that is to transition our energy sector to one that is emissions free, one that is truly renewable. And that will not only help slow down sort of the CO2 emissions that are causing global warming, but it'll also make us more resilient as climate changes. Our energy infrastructure will be able to continue to generate energy. And so we want to push ourselves to expanding into this clean energy future as quickly as we can. And our power companies have a huge role to play in that. They're making, multi-billion-dollar investments in power infrastructure all over the state. And by power infrastructure, I mean like power plants, things that actually produce the power that we use. And so the Public Service Commission regulates Georgia Power, and there's a couple of key processes through which they do that. One of them is the Integrated Resource Plan, or the IRP. And it basically is fancy language for long-term planning. It's like a 20-year plan that the power company puts together that says, this is what we expect our demand to be. These are the sources of energy that we're going to invest in or continue to operate. Here's some new things that we'll try to do. And it, so it's basically just putting out a plan for like what the power company is going to spend their resources on to generate power for people based on the demand that they expect. That process takes place every 3 years, and it is open to the public. They have hearings that the public is able to attend. The Georgia Public Service Commission building is right next door to the state capitol in downtown Atlanta. And they're doing lots of live streaming on YouTube too. So if you're, not up for a trip, you can certainly live stream it on YouTube, and you can call your commissioners. You can email them. You can make public comments and tell them, what kind of future it is that you want to see. Because they don't hear enough, because they are so under the radar, from people. They don't hear enough from everyday folks. Who are, want to see this future. They hear a lot from Georgia Power lobbyists. They hear a lot from industry folks, but they don't hear enough from everyday people who want a clean energy future, but also everyday people who are struggling with high bills. And this is where the second process comes in that the Public Service Commission goes through to regulate Georgia Power. It's called the rate case. And it follows the integrated resource plan. And so it's also once every 3 years. And during this rate case is when the power company puts forth a rate proposal, basically saying that in order to produce all of this energy that we put in this integrated resource plan, this is how much money we're going to need from customers in Georgia. And the reason why that exists is because we don't really, as customers, have the freedom of picking a different energy provider, right? We have to basically go with Georgia Power or your local co-op or municipal utility, all of which buy power from Georgia Power. And so they don't have any real competition. So the role of the Public Service Commission is to make sure that they don't bring rates up to a point where they're making all of this profit, but people are struggling. And so that negotiation takes place during the rate case. But our Public Service Commission, not hearing enough from people, thinks that bills aren't that high, and they think that they're doing pretty well on clean energy, even though you can talk to everyday people, they're struggling to pay their bills, and also people want to see more investment in clean energy across the board in Georgia. And so that rate case process most recently took place in the integrated resource plan, most recently took place in 2019. And although we got some really great, goals that the Public Service Commission pushed for clean energy, I believe that we could be getting more. We could be pushing Georgia Power to do more. They have the resources to do more. They keep making decisions to invest in dirty energy. So things like natural gas and, of course, the Plant Vogtle nuclear plant, which, is in the media often because it is over budget and behind schedule and costing billions of dollars. And customers are going to pick up a significant part of that tab. So, they keep making these decisions to invest in energy that's not renewable, that's not completely clean. And, so that integrated resource plan happened in 2019. It was followed by a rate case. Georgia Power asked for, I believe, $200 more a year from each customer, a little bit more than $200 a year from each customer. And we did a lot of work to organize communities around this issue to make sure that they knew that the rate case was happening and that they called their commissioners and told them, look, we want more. We don't want our bills going up. It's not. Yeah, we just don't want the bills to go up. And part of the justification that Georgia Power used to raise bills was things like coal ash cleanup. So if you're not familiar with coal ash, it's the byproduct from burning coal to produce power. They take that ash waste, put it in basically a pond that's not properly lined, and the chemicals from that are leaking down into the ground because it's not properly lined. And it's been places like Juliet, Georgia have tested their water and found that there are chemicals that are contaminating their water. And so Georgia Power is under some pressure to clean that up. So rather than, just eat the cost and clean it up, they want to charge customers for it. So that was one of many justifications they used to bring bills up on customers. And despite tons of calls, tons of emails, people coming and testifying in person, the Public Service Commission basically gave Georgia Power that rate case increase. We were able to get it reduced a little bit. So I don't want to seem like we didn't have any success. We did get the increase reduced just a bit, but it's still going to cost customers on average $175 more a year, which might not sound like a lot depending on how much money you're making, but there are quite a few people who are struggling to make ends meet. Every extra dollar matters. These are low-income people living in poverty, also seniors living on fixed incomes who are very concerned about this $175 bill increase.
Sure.
So these are all reasons why the Public Service Commission must be paid attention to. And, these key intervention points, the IRP, the rate case, happen every 3 years. The next one's going to happen in 2022. So I encourage people to plug in with groups like GIPL, with groups like Georgia Conservation Voters Education Fund, to make sure that you get notified when these processes happen and that you can weigh in. But even beyond that, you should be calling your public service commissioner and telling them, look, I want, I want a clean energy future and I don't want my bills to go up. That way they hear that over and over again, and are able to, they're accountable to you because you vote for them, right? So, you've got to call them and let them know what future you want to see. And
Yeah.
I'll say this, I don't think I made it clear. The reason why the rate case was so unjust was because Georgia Power is making billions of dollars in profit every year. The executives are making, many millions in compensation. The company has not missed a beat. Their parent company, Southern Company, which is their parent, on the stock market, is one of the highest performing utilities on the stock market, meaning the company is doing incredibly well while the people of Georgia are suffering and struggling to make ends meet in the middle of a pandemic. Um, and so I think it's been particularly egregious, the decisions the commission has made over the past year with the rate case. Um, there were some COVID costs that Georgia Power incurred that have also recently been added to bills. The Public Service Commission allowed the Georgia Power to start resuming shutoffs in the middle of the pandemic where we have very little economic relief. So, I think it's really important that folks call their commissioners and tell them that these things are unjust and that you are watching and that you do want a clean energy future and you don't want to be paying high rates while padding the pockets of Georgia Power.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying all that because there are these kind of two primary pillars, that the Public Service Commission kind of works on when it comes to energy, which is what's the future of our energy mix, how are we producing it, and who pays for it and how much do they pay.
Exactly.
And I think that obviously should be important to all the people tuning in to this show and who are in our network. But as people of faith, then we still have to, if we're keeping climate at the forefront of our mind, then we want to know, how can we get cleaner resources on the grid? And then because we have this core tenet of love for neighbor and for justice and equity, then we want to make sure that bringing online those resources doesn't cause an unjust burden to particular communities, or that continuing to disperse costs for polluting energy doesn't continue to disproportionately impact certain communities. And I wonder if you could just briefly touch on how, you talked about when you first came to Georgia and learning about kind of racial disparities and segregation via economics and by race here in Georgia. And obviously in your work, there's been a lot of intersections with racial equity, racial justice, equity generally, energy burden, those kind of things. And I wonder if you could talk about how those concepts play into the decisions that the Public Service Commission makes as well. You briefly touched on kind of the moratorium on shutoffs, which we worked on in the summer. And there are obviously some energy burden issues, especially in the city of Atlanta, that comes to when it comes to energy efficiency and how to finance those things. And I wonder if you could just talk about that as well.
Yeah, I do like to start by saying, like, I like to work at the intersection of climate and social justice because these issues are intricately connected. They are, not something that can be pulled apart. When we're talking about environmental pollution, communities of color have been on the front lines of that pollution for decades. There are numerous reports showing, that communities of color are on the front lines of various industrial activity. And of course, power companies their neighborhoods being adjacent to things like power plants, and that causing lots of health issues for communities of color. If they're burdened with all of these health issues, that's costing them in medical bills, it's costing them in quality of life. So they're very much impacted by existing environmental pollution. Black children have the highest likelihood of getting asthma, and they have the highest rates of asthma. So these are things that, are impacting communities of color all over the country, and including here in Georgia. And then as we look ahead and we think about climate change, we're expecting droughts, we're expecting more storms, we're expecting flooding, all of these different extreme weather events that will cause a disruption in the way that we do business and the way that we live our lives, and it will cause quite a bit of displacement. And so when we're talking about communities of color, many of them unfortunately are also low income communities, meaning that they do not have resources to be as resilient when these things happen to them. If a drought comes in, if I'm a farmer and a drought comes in and it wipes my crop out, I'm, going to be impacted by that. Where do my resources to recover from that? If I live on the coast and a hurricane comes in and floods the city and floods my home, I have to move. Where are my resources to moving? So these communities of color are, on the front lines of existing environmental pollution and on the front lines of climate change as it continues to worsen. So that's one connection here that's really important to make. And getting specific to the Public Service Commission, when you're talking about low income communities that are struggling, as I said before, every extra dollar on their bill matters. So the energy infrastructure that Georgia Power chooses to invest in, again, has a direct impact on the rates that people ultimately pay. And we know that if they invest in solar and if they do it well, that we can actually bring power bills down overall, because you're not paying to maintain all of this dirty infrastructure, which is very costly, and paying for things like coal ash cleanup on the back end. Right. So we definitely want to see more investment in that clean, renewable energy. And hopefully, as we make that transition, we'll start to see some downward pressure on rates. The other thing is the Public Service Commission's recent decisions about COVID costs and the utility shutoffs. So I'll start with COVID costs. Everybody has been impacted by COVID. Georgia Power had to continue to operate. It is, part of their mission to provide reliable and secure energy. And so they had to continue to operate. They had to get lots of employees to do overtime. They had cleaning services, meals, all of these things that cost them a few $1 million. And then they basically, even though they had gotten their stimulus payments, they still felt empowered to go to the Public Service Commission and ask that these charges that they incurred be put on people's power bills, which I'm still not sure how they justified. And the Public Service Commission voted to allow them to put those costs on people's bills, even though the company, like I said, is making billions of dollars. They could have eaten that couple of million. At some point, I want to say here that I'm not anti corporation. I'm not anti companies making profit, but there is a certain point at which, it's the company's responsibility to take a hit versus just putting those additional charges on people. And if the company paid that $1 million and didn't get it recouped, they would have been fine. It's not like they would be at imminent risk of not operating, or they wouldn't make a profit. They would be fine. They would still be profitable, incredibly profitable for that matter. So it really just is not just to come to people who are struggling, many of whom we're experiencing record level unemployment. And it's hit communities of color particularly bad. A lot of them are frontline workers whose jobs have been completely decimated by this pandemic. So we've got record levels of unemployment. So it's just not fair to allow this company to put charges on people's bills so they can just continue to, profit while people are suffering. And so that's one unjust thing that is impacting low-income communities and communities of color. And then the final thing I'll say is the utility shutoffs right at the beginning of the pandemic in early 2020. In the first stimulus package, there was a federal moratorium on utility shutoffs. So that means no shutoffs until the moratorium expires. So that's energy, that's water, et cetera. That moratorium expired over the summer, and Georgia Power and the Public Service Commission had a meeting, and it was a public hearing. And they basically discussed how they were going to proceed with utility shutoffs. And they didn't miss a beat. There was very little discussion about, well, let's put it off. People are still struggling. It was, no, yeah, go ahead and start cutting people's power bills off. The commission is under the belief that the relief, the payment plans, payment assistance plans are adequate, and they're not, which is evident, just evidence of them being sort of out of touch with their constituents. They point to things like the LIHEAP program, which I don't remember the full acronym, but there's things that basically help people pay their power bills. If you fall behind, you can go get assistance. You can get assistance at the Salvation Army. You can get it at, your local community action authorities. The issue with this assistance is it just does not go far enough. People, one, don't really know about it. It's not like they're sending out sheets in people's power bills with this information,
Right.
which would be a great improvement. But one is people don't know about it, and then two is when they do find out about it, they sort of all are coming to the same place. And there's just such a demand, the money runs out, and in addition to the money running out, once you get assistance, you can't come back and get assistance again. So if you were unemployed and your power bill, was piling up, and then you go get assistance and you're still unemployed, your power bill is going to continue to pile up. And then where's your, you no longer can get that
Right.
first, bucket of assistance that you got. So the payment assistance programs are not well known enough, and they're insufficient. And then the other thing that they've done is this prepayment plan. So they were saying, well, that'll help people. The challenge with the prepayment plan is you have to put money on your account. There has to be money in your account to keep your power bill on, because it's a prepay plan. So it doesn't take the pressure off of communities at all. In fact, it puts more pressure on them because they're struggling to get $5, $7, $12 here to put money on their account so their utility doesn't get shut off. And this is a daily thing, So these payment programs are really just not sufficient for, helping people stay on top of these power bills. And, again, this is all in the middle of a pandemic. This is all in the middle of a crisis, historic unemployment. The commission should have been thoughtful about what was happening, but instead they gave the green light for Georgia Power to resume utility shutoffs, and they shut off power for tens of thousands of people that month. Many people did ultimately get their power restored, but there are still thousands of people who did not. And that was the last time I looked at those numbers was in the summer. So I'm not sure where they are as of today. But I'm sure it's still pretty egregious. So again, all of these things are impacting low income people, communities of color, disproportionately, who are already paying out larger portions of their income on power, which is energy burden. So we really need to make sure that we know who the commission is, and we pay attention to what they do, and we stay in contact with them all year, and especially during these critical processes where they're making decisions about our energy future.
Yeah, no, Brionte, thank you so much for coming on the show this morning and for this beautiful primer on who the Public Service Commission is, what they do, how it impacts every individual Georgian, because it truly does. And even if you're not a person who's feeling the direct bill impact, for instance, of some of these choices, you have a responsibility to care about how everyone is impacted by the decisions they make. So the seat is incredibly important. There's a million other things that I want to talk to you about that we don't have time for. So now I have to find the time. We have to find a time for you to come back on the show, because there's a lot of other stuff to dive into about Georgia's clean energy future that I definitely want to ask you about. So, but thank you again, and thank you everybody for tuning in.